Welcome to Frog Talk, an Auction Frogs podcast series all about events and fundraising in a post-2020 world. For more information on Auction Frogs and the services we offer, visit auctionfrogs.org today.
And this time around with Stellar Fundraising Auctions, talking to Greg Quiroga. And Greg, now this has been something that has been such a big change for all of us, all the way from the nonprofits to, the fundraising companies. How has this last year been for you? And take us back to the starting. When did you finally decide, okay, we got to change what we're doing?
That question has a long answer, but I'll try to keep it short, Corey. Thanks for having me. So we started getting hit here in the San Francisco Bay Area in March. March 6th of 2020 is when the first shutdown orders started happening, and it started impacting our business pretty quickly. And within a couple of weeks, we were basically looking at 90-something% cancellation rate through March, April, May. It was, and that's our busiest season. And I spent a couple of days. We've got an Australian Shepherd and some great places to walk dogs here in the Bay Area, and I spent a couple of days, crying over spilt milk with the dog out, and thinking like, oh, well, maybe I should reconsider my career path. I've only been doing this for 17 years, and saw a couple of good examples coming out of Portland. Portland got impacted by the pandemic sooner than us, and they made some quick adaptations to doing virtual galas, and saw a couple of good examples and said, you know what, no, that could work. And so I would say within a couple of weeks of March, by 2 weeks into March 6th, within a week of March 6th, I was pitching virtual galas to every one of my clients and trying to get them on board with that. And I wound up doing my first virtual gala on Saturday, April 4th. And at that point, I felt like I was late to the game because there had been so many out of Portland already at that time. And did my second one on April 6th. And that first one, from a production standpoint, was really lowbrow. We did it in Zoom. We did it at noon Pacific time on a Saturday. All of the people who participated made their pledges in chat. We had issues with presenters and videos playing slowly, and all the things that you could imagine going wrong went wrong. But the thing that went right, the most important thing, was that we were able to connect directly with supporters and raise a lot of necessary funds for an important cause. And so we raised $900,000 in chat on the first go. And I said, okay, this is going to work. And I, at that point, focused my entire business and energy on doing virtual events. By April, I was tired of playing infectious disease expert and when can we be back in the room together again prognosticator. And so I started doing educational webinars, just focused on virtual galas. Like, look, as long as this is what we've got, let's focus on doing this well for as long as it's relevant. And, for better or for worse, it's been relevant much longer than any of us thought.
Well, and will continue to be relevant, I think, for a long time to come. Yeah. Now, Greg, what were some of the early mistakes that you learned from? What were the first things you're like, oh yeah, don't do that?
And what's interesting is, not to skirt the question, but I promise I'll meet it head on eventually, but I'm an auctioneer and we tend to talk a lot. A lot of the early mistakes that we encountered were the same mistakes that people would have encountered doing a live gala. And that is just assuming that because you build it, they will come, right? And we did a couple of events that we built it and people didn't show up. And we started to realize early on that the pandemic tended to magnify tendencies, especially in the nonprofit attendee world, if you will, in the minds of supporters. And so if your crowd is a partying crowd who likes to see and be seen and have drinks together and, woohoo, have a good time, and do an auction and a fundraising, sure we do that, then the virtual gala is going to be really challenged because they want to party more than they want to fundraise. But on the opposite side of that coin, if your crowd is really committed to supporting you and your cause and shows up to make that happen, we've had wild success with virtual galas. And so I'd say that the number one mistake right off the bat was just assuming that people would show up no matter what and support. Number two was trying to replicate their gala in a virtual environment. Just like carbon copy. This is what we do live in person, so this is what we're going to do on screen. And
Mm-hmm.
the big adaptation that we made in that respect was like, look, we get it. What we want to create is something that looks and feels like your event, is familiar to your crowd, so that when they turn on their television or their computer or whatever it is where they're going to watch the show, when they turn it on, it's going to be resonant. It's going to be comfortable. They're going to have familiarity with it. We want it to be your organization, and tell your message and tell your story. But we also don't want to just try to cookie cutter a live event, because that won't work, right? And so virtual offers lots of challenges, but it also offers lots of benefits that you can't get in person, in terms of storytelling, in terms of transitioning between speakers, in terms of audience attention span. And one of the first things that we learned was, create a narrative arc that leads people to wanting to give you money, and you don't have to rush to do it and go scrambling headlong into doing it. But if in the first third of your event, we try to get to the fund the need and focus on the fund the need first, and do a big storytelling arc that gets to that. And that's been wonderfully successful virtually, and it'll be interesting to see what happens when we're, quote, back in the room, unquote.
Well, yeah, and that's something we're all waiting to see what that's going to be, and as it continues to evolve for the foreseeable future. Now, Greg, what were some of the biggest surprises that you found, through the pleasant surprises that you didn't even think about going into it?
Well, I think one of the biggest surprises, in a good way, is just how quickly an entire industry in the nonprofit fundraising world, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry on an annual basis, and how a lot of these are, I don't want to say mom and pop operations, but we're talking schools, right? These are volunteer-run organizations, or not organizations, but events, volunteer-run events, and how quickly so many different organizations and volunteers and staff and everything else were able to just make the transition to doing something different, right? And putting out a completely different product. And how well AV companies and bidding platforms were able to adapt to it, and then how well received it was. We did one event where we started planning it in May, and this was going to be, I'm pretty sure, an October or November event. So we had a good runway on this, a good lead time leading up to the event. And back in May, all of their board members and their committee members kept saying, we don't want another Zoom. We can't sit through another Zoom meeting, so keep it as short as possible. So we trimmed that run of show down. It made it cut out things that would have been compelling, but we're like, nope, we have to make some really hard decisions. So we put together a 45-minute program that was super tight and well produced from beginning to end, with all the fundraising and everything else. It was, tick-tock, we were there. And by the time the show was over, all of their board members were like, oh my gosh, that was great. Why wasn't it longer? And we're like, it could have been, and I think part of it, one of the surprising things was how quickly we were able to start putting out professional-looking product, and how well received it was. And also, it was rewarding and surprising, and at the same time, not that surprising, that to find how many people rallied around their causes and how much we were able to raise. I mean, it was, I think on average last year, our fund the needs were bringing in 120% of what we would have expected to do in person.
Yeah.
And that level of giving in the midst of, at the beginning, what felt like end of the world level, tragedy, and I'm not trying to make light of it, because it definitely is tragedy, but to be able to come out of that and have helped raise money for causes that really needed to be raising money. I mean, one of the first things I wrote back in March last year was a blog post about, now is not the time to not be raising money. So many organizations, one of the biggest mistake I saw last year, to circle back, was organizations deciding not to raise money.
Yeah.
because they're like, oh, well, we don't do PPE, or we're not serving people who are sick, and and my three questions were, are your clients impacted? Has your need gone up? Will people support someone else if you don't ask them for money now? And I think that was the number one mistake I saw last year, was people not doing any fundraising.
Well, and we saw that quite a bit, that kind of ostrich in the sand. I will just sit here and I will wait out this year, and it's all going to be better next year. Well, yeah, certain things are better, certain things are getting better, but there's still a whole lot of unknown. So now there's all these organizations and nonprofits that did make their way through last year going, okay, we're just going to hold out. Well, now they're realizing they can't hold out. They need those funds. The world might have stopped to a certain degree, but the need did not. So to those organizations that are still on the fence about, do we try a virtual gala? Do we not? What advice do you give to them, Greg?
Well, I mean, the good news is a lot of other organizations that went ahead and did that learned the hard lessons for you, right? And so if you're coming to this now and just thinking, hey, maybe we should explore virtual, like, for starters, the amount of money you're going to raise doing a virtual event versus the amount of money you're going to doing no event is staggeringly different, right? And in fact, the amount of money you're going to raise in a virtual event is going to be really close to, if not more than, what you would have expected to raise in person. On average, there's outliers for every data set, right? But generally speaking, my advice to anybody considering virtual is they work. If you're going to go out and watch a lot of other virtual galas as try to get a feel for what you should do, turn the sound off. Look and feel for what it is you want, how you would want your gala to be represented virtually. But if you start watching too many galas for organizations with which you have no emotional connection, you're going to get bored. And there's a reason for that, right? And people are like, oh, well, that means virtual galas are boring. No. Okay, I mean, I would say the same thing about in-person galas. In-person galas are boring. If you walked into a ballroom on a Saturday night and sat in the very back at a table where you didn't know anybody and you didn't like the food and you didn't know any of the speakers and you're listening to what's happening on stage and you have no emotional connection to it, you're going to get bored, right? Because it's not your cause. But to go out and watch other people's virtual galas just with an eye towards what it is you want it to look like. And then you can put together something that is going to be really resonant with your crowd. Your crowd will show up. Your crowd will support you. And even the most technologically challenged crowds are finding their way to these virtual events. And sometimes it means that you're going to have to do some work in terms of hand-holding to get people logged on, to get people there at the time. But look, here are the challenges of doing an in-person gala, right? In person, you've got to go out and you've got to get your auction lots and you've got to come up with your appeal and you've got to come up with the speakers, and then you've got to do the really hard work of getting people in the room, in the frame of mind to support you. What's changed with the virtual gala? The only difference is, instead of trying to get people in the room, you're trying to get them in front of a screen or maybe at a watch party. You still have to do all of the same work. If you in that work, it sounds difficult because it is, but that's one of the beautiful things about development and nonprofit professionals is that they do really challenging work and relationship building and are able to make miracles happen on a daily basis for their clients because of that. So to anybody who hasn't done one of these virtual galas and is on the fence about it, A, it will work, and B, you can do it. Like, you can do it and you can raise money and engage your people and give them something that is going to be at once entertaining and educational and emotionally uplifting and resonant. And I think that's something we all need.
Absolutely. Now, Greg, how can people follow you, see your blogs, and learn more about what you do?
I appreciate that. And you can find me online. Our company's website is Stellar SF, as in Stellar San Francisco, STELLARSF.com. We have an 8-part webinar series there on how to do virtual galas that's free. So come on and log on and click through and welcome to all the education you can possibly get. And I'm always available for questions. If anybody wants to shoot us an email, I'm happy to jump on the phone. I may be high pressure when it comes to trying to make money for your organization, but I never pressure anybody, and I'm always happy to give out information.
All right. Greg, thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you, Corey. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Frog Talk, an Auction Frogs podcast series all about events and fundraising in a post-2020 world. For more information on Auction Frogs and the services we offer, visit auctionfrogs.org today.